On this episode of the Girl Talk podcast,
emotionally manipulating that just doesn't work.
Right.
But we underestimate the power of prayer and how God is working behind the scenes even when we don't see it. Hello there. You're listening to the Girl Talk podcast. My name is Carol.
I'm Kelly.
I'm Tricia.
And we're so glad you've joined us today. We are going to talk about supporting your husband's spiritual walk without forcing it.
Oh my gosh, I've done so many things
only
wrong.
2/3 of us
Right.
can really speak to this
Oh, well.
because I'm a single mom. But
Well, you can you can help us see blind spots.
okay,
Yeah.
maybe.
And you were married for
Almost 10 years, yeah.
So there's no doubt you have some
Yep.
stories from then.
So
well.
how do I encourage my husband towards spiritual leadership? This is a really big issue in the church. I even think we had somebody email about this because by and large, women tend to be, well, I don't know if I should say that, but I was going to say, but women tend to be more spiritually connected than men. Would that be true, do you think, sometimes?
I would say that they're more active. That I would say that research probably shows.
Okay, yeah, that's
that
where I was
they
going with
are
it.
more active in
Right.
church. They are the primary entry point in the family with the church. So they are more likely to take the kids to church than the husband is, than the father is, and they're typically more active in church than their husbands are.
That's where I was trying
Yeah,
to go.
there
with
you
that.
go.
I didn't say that well at all, but I knew I could count on you, KB. So thank you very much for that. So
At least bring in the research piece
Yeah,
of it. You know how I like
exactly.
numbers and research.
exactly. So how do we encourage husbands towards spiritual leadership without nagging, without guilting them, without trying to, emotionally manipulate the circumstance? Because I know that's hard to do.
Oh, I mean, I'll just tell you a little bit of my story. That's exactly what I've done. I mean, my husband and I have been married for 26 years. And for probably the first, I don't know, I would like to say 25 and a half, but it was it was a lot less than that.
Yeah.
I spent most of my time using tactics that are not helpful. They are not upbuilding. They are, wagging my finger. No, I mean, shame, why are you not the spiritual leader of our household? And my husband, he didn't grow up that way. He didn't grow up with conversation about the importance of being the spiritual leader of the house or about being really spiritually active in the family. And so for me, and I didn't grow up with that example either, but I knew what I thought I knew what it was supposed to look like.
Right.
And I had the right answer for what the family should look like. And so I did a lot of comparing him to other people, which is not helpful. I did a whole lot of pointing out how he could be doing a better job at
You would
that.
say these things to him.
I would say these things to him, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is not helpful. I mean, it was not showing respect to my husband. It was, it really caused lots of problems in our marriage because he never felt worthy. He never felt like he could do a good enough job. And it wasn't until I truly laid all of it down at the foot of the cross and I gave up and I almost threw my hands up in the air and said, God, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to solve this situation. I can't fix my husband. I need you to do it for me. And God said, thank you for finally releasing that to me because I really am in control and you're not. And so my ways are better than your ways.
Yeah.
And you just need to give me your husband and give me the control. And so for me, giving it to the Lord, praying over my husband were the things that helped me and helped my husband even grow spiritually was when I finally stopped nagging him about it.
That's awesome.
No.
I think that's amazing. And I think you
It wasn't
pointed
amazing for so many years,
but that
though.
you've done that, though, that you recognize that and you took those steps. That's really powerful.
Well, and he did go from being only a little bit interested in spiritual things to this Christmas he asked for a Bible for Christmas because he wanted to be able to read it every day. And so I bought myself one as well. And so that I could, the same exact Bible, the Chronological Daily Study Bible.
That's a great Bible.
So, and now I see him every single day sitting down and reading the Bible. And 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that was not something he did. That was not even 10 years ago. That was not something he was interested in.
That's great.
And now he's every day. He's ahead of. I mean, I'm behind. I'm still a month behind in my reading, and he is determined. He is going to stay on top of it every day, and he's so hungry to soak it in. And a lot of that's because of it is 100% because of what the Lord's doing in his heart and in his mind. And I'm not getting in the way. That's what was happening. I was getting in the way of my husband's spiritual growth by nagging, by demanding, by shaming, even if it was subtle. I did all the things that you weren't supposed to do, and God did all the things that God does.
Well, what's great, I think, is that, number one, you're honest about this, and that your motive was you wanted him to be the spiritual leader. It wasn't like you wanted some, $1 million. You wanted him to be this. There was a good motive behind it,
Yeah, right.
so that y'all could grow together in faith. So I recognize that. With my husband, when we first started dating, and even when we were married, he would tell you that he wasn't a Christian, and I did not know that. I thought he was a Christian. He had been brought up in a church, but it was a very formal church, and there was no real relationship with Jesus at that point. But he told me that he was a Christian. I believed he was a Christian. We got married. We started going to church together, and as we went to this church that was very passionate in New York City. And I remember he was like, "I need to be saved." I was like, "You do? What? Wait, what?" And so he realized once he was going to this church that it was about relationship. It wasn't about, going down the aisle and saying yes and then not changing your life at all. And so what happened with him is, on his own accord, he decided to be, he got saved and got baptized and started living for God. And so that all happened without me even knowing it, because I probably would have messed it up. But that all happened without me even knowing. Yeah. And I think part of it is he saw what the Lord was doing in my life.
Yeah.
And he was seeing the changes that were happening in me from being in this church and taking steps forward in my relationship with Jesus. And I think he wanted that. And it also pointed up to him, I don't have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I walked down an aisle when I was a kid, but I don't have that passion and that desire. So that all happened without me knowing it. But then as we've continued in our relationship now, we've been married for 23 years, I think he has continued to see me desperately needing Jesus. I desperately need Jesus. And so every morning, if I'm not getting up early to play tennis, I am on my bed reading my Bible, and he sees that. And so I haven't had to tell him that.
Right.
Because he's seen it,
Right.
and he knows the difference in me from when I start my Bible study to when I'm done. Oftentimes, being in the presence of the Lord changes me, and I think he has seen that. And I think that's he's said that to me, that's inspired him in his walk, and I haven't had to ask him about it because he's seen it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to.
I love that there's like two totally different situations. When you didn't know his spiritual condition really,
Yeah.
and one where you have somebody who grows up in a house that looks vastly different than what you want your family to look like. Because I think those are two common problems that could present themselves. That I think, especially being from this part of the country. Everybody grows up around church, so probably everybody would tell you they're a Christian.
Yeah.
Even if they're not, going to church, and they go on the major holidays, Mother's Day, Easter, and Christmas, and that's the totality of their relationship with God. But most people would probably say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian," but as far as having a relationship with Jesus, they may not. And you have people who they've never seen that modeled for them, so they don't really know what that looks like. Because I think that plays into your story a little bit too, because it wasn't at all what he thought.
Right.
And so he comes upon that discovery. I remember very clearly, I was in Morganton, and we were doing a concert there. I think it was Sidewalk Prophets, and a woman came up to me and she said, "I've got to tell you my story." And I always love it when people do that.
Yeah, that's
because
great.
I mean, it blows my mind.
Something
sometimes.
good's coming.
Right. And so she says, my husband was an atheist. She said, I prayed for him for 13 years.
Wow.
And she said, he came to Christ and he's now teaching Sunday school. And
That is such a blessing.
I was like, and she was one of those people that kind of chased me. We were all packing up and going out to this. She said, I had to come back and tell you my story. So I'm so glad you did. And I think that spoke to me in such a powerful way. And I think that we underestimate the power of prayer.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to our spouse, and to know and to see her talk through that. And I'm not sure that most of us could last 13 minutes praying for something, because we live in a society, we want to drive through everything,
Instant
we
gratification.
Exactly. We want to, present God with a problem today and it needs to be solved by lunchtime, and we got to move on to the next thing. And I think that's a lot of the way we live our spiritual lives. But for her, for 13 years to spend time on her knees asking God to save her husband, and then he does so in such a fashion that he actually starts to teach Sunday school. I mean, that's wild,
Yeah.
But we don't often pray that way. And I think we pray for God to make our spouse the person that we want them to be, that we want them to be, not the person that God wants them to be.
Right.
And so I think that can be another stumbling block for those that we live life most closely with. We're not who they want us to be. Nobody. I have very rarely run into people who want to be told what to do. And so that's why, telling them, shaming them, guilting them, emotionally manipulating them just doesn't work.
Right.
But we underestimate the power of prayer and how God is working behind the scenes even when we don't see it.
And that long-term prayer.
Right.
Because that long-term prayer, it does change them and it changes us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, a big piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
God's constantly working on the prayer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of my story too, is, when I stopped talking and started praying, that's when God changed me as much as he changed my husband. He grew my faith in God. I mean, he grew my faith in himself, and he said, watch me. Watch what I can do when you let me take control, when you don't try to keep taking that control back.
Yeah.
When you trust me with your husband.
And the timing.
And the timing of it, yes. I can, I will show you the miracles that I can do, but you have to trust me. And it changed me.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the theme of everybody who would say, I wanted my husband to be this person, and he started here. And as long as I was at him all the time about reading his Bible or whatever the case may be, he stayed there. But when I submitted to God and said, this relationship is yours, you do what you want, it maybe didn't happen overnight, but things begin to change in us.
And, right along with that is the idea that I think we can have more compassion over our husbands, but also all men in society, because there's a war on men and manhood and the things that God's called a man to be. They're getting canceled for that. There's all kinds of societal pressure. And so a man is told to be this way, and then they're getting all kinds of cues from the world around them that you're not supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
And so remembering that and having compassion for my husband helps me to encourage him instead of come down on him.
Right. Yeah.
I'll never forget, I read a book many years ago. It was called Power of a Praying Wife. Have you, you guys ever read that?
Stormy O'Martian.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so she says in the first of that book, I think this is the quote, I may not get it exactly right, but she says, do you long to be right or do right? And I think in a lot of situations, we want to be right instead of do right, because the biblical model is for the husband to be the leader, right? And that's what we all want, but the ways that we go about it says something different about what we want. And so we got to be honest, first and foremost, with ourselves and with our motives.
Yeah.
And let God, and that phrase always haunted me, because do you want to be right or do you want to do right? And I think that is very much a place to start.
Don't you think that's right straight out of the Bible? I mean, think about the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it was said that you're going to want to, he's going to rule over you and you're going to want to rule over him. And so we're set up for this conflict.
Yeah.
The enemy brings it on and stirs it up within us. So we have to be aware of that.
Sure.
And you're right. And to check the motive and to pull back and then be led by God.
So how, if our friend is listening today and they're like, yeah, but you don't know my situation, they would be 100% right because we don't. But how did you begin to release control in your marriage? Kelly, I'm going to shoot that towards you since you kind of spoke to that in your opening story.
I think one of the things is that we have to be reminded, we have to remind ourselves that our relationship with Christ is our relationship with Christ. We can't own somebody else's relationship for them. And we can't blame our lack of growth on other people. We can't blame our lack of spiritual relationship with Jesus on other people. We can't look at our husbands and say, it's your fault that my spiritual growth is lacking, or it's your fault that our family isn't growing spiritually. It's not. We have to take the responsibility for ourselves for our own spiritual growth.
Yeah.
And we have to let our husbands take responsibility for their own spiritual growth. And in order to do that, we're going to have to trust God with both of those things.
Yeah.
We have to trust God with our own spiritual growth and the going deeper in relationship with us. And we have to trust God for his relationship with our husband and not try to get in the middle of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. Okay, I'm going to throw out a word that may or may not make y'all cringe. I remember very clearly, this was back when I was married, that I was going to speak at a women's event, and from time to time people will tell you what they want you to speak on, and other times they're like, whatever the Lord leads you to speak on. And I was going to this particular church, and I was having a conversation with the lady who invited me, and I said, what do you want me to speak on? She said, I don't care what you speak on as long as you don't talk about submission. So guess what? That was the very thing I wanted to talk about, but I didn't. But I think submission has caught a bad rap in our culture. Let's talk about it for a minute. Let's define it, and then both of you are giggling already. So go ahead and say what you want to say.
Well,
Define it. Yeah.
Submit is my word for the year.
Is it really?
Yes, that's the word God gave me as I sat on my bed asking for a word for the year. I'm like, how about passion or power? Submission. Submit. To submit, which is one of the most loving things that you can do. And it involves...
But culture doesn't see it that way. Culture sees it as
culture's not going to see it that way.
As a class thing. That submission is a lower class.
Like getting beaten.
Right.
Yes.
Or you do what I say and nothing else.
Yeah, powerless.
That's power. Yeah.
There's huge power in submitting.
Yes.
When you make the choice to submit, you have a lot of power.
Yeah.
You're choosing to submit, right? It is a word that encompasses humility and compassion. It is a word that has been modeled for us by Jesus as he willingly submitted to the cross and the will of the Father. It is a powerful word, and it is an active word. It is not a passive thing. It is an active choice, and it is a loving choice. And so I wrestled with God a little bit about that when that was the word that was in my spirit to be chosen for this year. But I'm actually really glad. You submit to one another out of love. So it is a loving choice. And as regards to my husband, I'm trying to put his welfare first.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not thinking of myself and what I want and what I need and what I think. I'm allowing him to go ahead of me in terms of that.
Yeah, and I think submission is first of all a God thing before it's a marriage thing.
For sure.
Well,
we submit to God first.
Right.
That is such a word that God gave me. It's been, wow. Right, it was before I had our son, so that's been 17 years ago. And I am a strong-willed personality.
Really? I hadn't noticed
Yep.
that about you.
Yeah, I'm a strong-willed personality. I like control. I'm a big fan of it. And I struggled a lot with that submission word, and especially when I didn't think that my husband was the spiritual leader of our household,
Yeah.
and I didn't see that fruit. Submitting to that was really difficult.
Yep.
And the Lord said to me very, very clearly through Scripture and through some counseling that I had with a former pastor friend. This pastor friend said to me, "You need to be reminded that when you are not honoring of and submitting to your husband, what it actually means is that you don't trust God with your husband.
Ooh.
That you are trying to do all of it on your own, and you are not trusting God. And first and foremost, you've got to submit to God.
Yeah.
And you've got to release control over your husband, over to him." And it changed everything. That was the beginning, really, of me starting that process of trusting God with my husband's salvation, with my husband's spiritual growth, with my husband's relationship with his son, with my husband's spiritual leadership of our household. All of that started because God said to me, "You're not trusting me."
So basically, I'm hearing you say that the solution to control is submission,
Yes.
but submission to God.
Submission to God. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when you submit to God, do you think it's true that it allows you to see submission to your husband in a different light?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I know probably somebody is getting ready to fire off an email to me right now.
Yeah.
And to say, how could you? Because I really think now, here's the thing. As with any Bible verse, there are people who have abused that.
Yes.
And that is not what we're
Yes.
speaking to.
Right.
We're not speaking about abuse, but I think that we as women have always thought that the word submission or submit was meant to keep us in our place.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And I don't think that was God's
No.
intention at all.
I agree.
I think that he's got a very special place for women in his work.
Jesus was radical in the way he loved women.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. And Jesus, as you said the example earlier, Jesus submitted to the Father. That meant he trusted the Father
right.
to lead, guide, and direct. Just like I want to submit to my husband because I want to trust him to lead, guide, and direct our family. I don't trust myself to lead, guide, and direct the family anymore. I need to trust him, and so it's a willingness. I am willing to submit. I want to submit because I want to trust you, and I want to feel safe and secure. I don't want to own it. I don't want to own that all by myself.
Why do I feel like we've kicked a little bit of a bee's nest here?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it can be.
true.
I think it can be a tricky word,
Mhm.
and
Sure.
it can be triggering for some people because they have had someone in their life abuse that. And I,
Yes.
like I say, I want to be very clear that that's not what we're speaking to. But I think that people who are not believers see the word submit as a term to keep people in their place.
Right.
And
And,
I don't
a lot
think
of
that's-
churches preach that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's
Sure.
a lot of churches that have gotten that wrong, and that it does become this really yucky authoritarian.
You sit down
Wielding
and
of power.
shut your
Yes.
mouth
Yeah.
and don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, you
Speak
shut
up.
your mouth and do
Mhm.
exactly what I tell you to do all the time. And that is
Yeah.
definitely not God's intent with the word submit.
Yeah.
He wants us to submit to him, but that's not how he treats us. He doesn't treat us this authoritarian, shut up, sit down, and do what I tell you to way. And he doesn't want husbands to do that to their wives either. That
Grieves his
scripture even
heart.
talks about that husbands should love their wives the way Christ loves the church.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's with a love.
Yeah.
And so it's loving leadership. And so their job is to lovingly lead us. And our job is to willingly trust them and respect them and submit to them as a leader.
Yeah.
And the word you just said, I think, needs to be highlighted too, which is respect. That's a huge word for men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've probably heard this before, but they did like tests and research, and men said they would rather be respected than loved.
Yeah.
Because it's that big of a deal for them. And so when I am trying to talk to my husband about something when I'm in a good place, I remember to try to give that respect.
Yeah.
If you want open communication, that is a very big piece of it.
Yeah. And I'll throw out this. If you're struggling in your marriage, Emerson Eggerichs, wonderful book called Love and Respect, dives into that very thing, how women want to be loved and men want to be respected. That's a great resource for you as well. But if you have any questions, I'm not sure that we can answer them, but
We will certainly make up some answers.
Yeah, we'll make up something. But if you want to talk about submission, and maybe you're walking through a difficult circumstance, we'd love the opportunity to pray for you, and we would love the opportunity to join you, to walk alongside you, to journey with you, because that's what this podcast is all about. So you're welcome to get in touch. You can email us at girltalk@thelightfm.org. Check in on the Facebook page. And hey, one way that you can help the Girl Talk ministry grow so we can share the gospel with more people is to like and subscribe to this podcast. Also, leave us a review. That makes sure that other people get to know about us, and they may just tune in here and come to know Jesus as their Savior. And that is the whole reason we do this. So we're going to save you a seat next time we record the next Girl Talk podcast. We'll see you then.